Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little black subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that black subscribe button. Really does help our audience grow, really does help our channel grow, really does help and mean more than you could possibly know. So go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Also, thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet 50 on any game, get $250 in free bets. Thank you again to Betfred. Thank you again to you. Now, here is the video that you came here for, and that is conference realignment. I've been following college sports for probably 30 years at this point, and it is an ever-evolving, ever-present topic in college sports. But it really has, over the past two off seasons, really picked up steam. Specifically, when Texas and Oklahoma left for the SEC, that led to one wild round of rumors and innuendo and this and that. And then, of course, it was heightened even more last offseason when we found out that UCLA and USC were headed to the Big Ten. And so what I have said over the past couple years is that it is now basically a land grab where everybody that is not in one of those two conferences is doing everything they can to get into one of those two conferences, or at the very least, find stable footing. We've discussed it a number of times, but what I would also say is it has never been put on paper, I don't believe, as well as it has until Monday, when Ross Dellinger from Sports Illustrated, who actually was on this podcast one time, Ross Dellinger put out a very extensive report for Sports Illustrated explaining the landscape of college sports. And let me tell you, it just isn't pretty. So I want to hit on everything that came out of that article. And what I want to start with is probably the most interesting part of that article, which is the present and future of the ACC. We actually talked about this a few months back. I remember an episode in February. It stemmed from a conversation that kind of leaked out. It was sort of public, but it sort of wasn't, where Florida State's school president, a guy by the name of Michael Alford, basically said, listen, this is not sustainable for us in this league. And so behind the scenes, you kind of knew stuff wasn't going well. But then we found out via the Ross Dellinger report that there are now 7 schools that have been meeting privately that are basically trying to figure out what are our options outside of this conference, or at the very least outside of the TV contract. Those 7 schools, by the way, on Monday afternoon by Brett McMurphy were reported. This was not in the Ross Dellinger report. In the Brett McMurphy report, it was the 7 schools are Florida State, Clemson, Miami, North Carolina, NC State, Virginia Tech, and Virginia. Those are the 7 schools that are kind of trying to see, hey, what's going on? What could we potentially get out of this current situation? So really, the situation with the ACC, those 7 schools are trying to get out. And what it really stems from is basically pretty straightforward and something we've talked about before. They got themselves a really bad TV deal. So the ACC TV deal is bad in 2 ways. One, doesn't pay them very much. Pays them $30 million a year. By the end, it'll be up to about 40, 41, 42 million. There's just one problem. 30 to 35 million a year per school sounds great to a lot of places, but compared to the schools they're competing with in the SEC and the Big Ten, that's about $30 million a year less than what Georgia and Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State and whoever are making. And by the way, it's not just 1 year, it's every year. So every year, say if you're Clemson, South Carolina is making 30 million more than you in 2023, and then 30 more in 2024, and then 30 more in 2025. And so the Clemsons and Florida States, the big football powers, are starting to get worried. Beyond that, this is where it gets really tough, is that the ACC contract is set to run through 2036. So keep that in mind, because again, you're falling behind 30 to 40 million a year now. But the Big Ten is going to renegotiate its TV contract in 7 years. The Big 12 is going to renegotiate its TV contract before the ACC comes up again. So you can imagine how far they're going to fall behind by 2036. When I tell you this is the worst deal since the Louisiana Purchase, I'm pretty sure the ACC TV contract is the worst deal since the Louisiana Purchase. So I bring all this up to say the ACC, the top 7 schools, the 7 schools that I would argue are probably most committed to football, they're frustrated. They're trying to figure out what's next. And really, not just from this article, but in the bigger picture, there's really two avenues that those 7 schools are looking to explore in terms of either making more money or getting out of the contract. The way that these 7 schools are trying to figure things out, one of 2 options. They're either going to try to get out of the league, or they are going to try to get an uneven pay scale in the league. In other words, Florida State will make more than Boston College. Clemson will make more than Pitt, etc. Here's the problem. I don't think either one of them is a very good option. In terms of just trying to flat get out of the contract, good luck. And here's why. It's because if you remember, and you might not, you probably don't, but from literally the day that Texas and Oklahoma left announced they were leaving the Big 12 for the SEC, I said it and I'm positive of it. There are schools in this ACC, there are schools in other parts of the country. They're trying to get out of their TV contract. So it's not just a last 2 or 3 weeks thing that Florida State and Clemson and Miami and NC State and UNC have been trying to get out of this contract with the ACC. I believe we're closing in on close to 2 years now that they're trying to figure out a way to get out of it. The contract is called a grant of rights. And what the contract that the grant of rights is basically, let me rephrase. I'm tripping over my words here. The grant of rights, what it basically says is this. All these 15 schools in the ACC have basically agreed to this grant of rights. I think it's 14 because Notre Dame's a basketball, or it's a non-football school. But the 14 schools in the ACC, what the grant of rights basically says is this. The ACC owns the rights to broadcast their home sporting events, football specifically in this case. And so why it seems like it's going to be pretty tough to get out of this is, 1, their lawyers have been trying for years, and 2, even if they were able to pay a fee or get out or do whatever, the ACC would still in theory own their TV rights. And so Clemson can leave tomorrow, Florida State can leave tomorrow, but it's uncertain if they would be able to broadcast their TV games, their games on TV, their home games anyway. And so because of it, hate to say it, don't think Florida State has much value to the SEC. Don't think UNC has much value to the SEC or the Big Ten if you can't broadcast their home football games, their home basketball games, or whatever. So because of it, I don't think they're getting out of the grant of rights, at least not anytime soon. Now, at some point, could they pay some exorbitant fee to get out? I think it's possible. But listen, Texas and Oklahoma paid $50 million to get out of their grant of rights with the Big 12 a year ahead of schedule. And the Big 12 agreed to it and was ready to move on. We're talking about 13 more years of this grant of rights. So it's not going to happen anytime soon. Because of it, I don't see the scenario where they have much success getting out of this contract. Although, again, the lawyers are going to try, but it leads to a second situation with the grant of rights or with the ACC. And that second situation is this. From there, they are going to try to push for an uneven distribution model. And this is something that we have talked about before. But in February, there was a big report. The commissioner, the president of Florida State, he basically went on record and said, look, this is not sustainable. And we don't think, frankly, it's even fair to us. It's not fair to us because we make way more revenue for this conference than most everybody else. The number that he pegged based on TV ratings, based on the number of games that got this many viewers, I believe the number was like 7 million or 5 million or something viewers. Florida State's AD basically said, look, we make 15% of the revenue for this entire conference, yet we're getting paid the same amount as Boston College and Pitt and Syracuse. That has to change. And so on the one hand, that feels more feasible to me than just breaking the contract. I don't think that's really in the cards. The problem becomes, and we talked about this a few months ago, why would Pitt or Boston College or Wake Forest or Syracuse agree to an uneven distribution model, even if Clemson and Florida State are making a disproportional amount of money for the conference? Why would Boston College or Syracuse agree? Because at the end of the day, 1, it doesn't really help them. Boston College and Wake Forest can look North Carolina and Clemson and whoever in the eye and say, you agreed to this deal. You already have the advantage of the bigger fan base, the bigger alumni base, the more aggressive boosters. Now we're going to give you more money on top of that. Sorry, you agreed to this deal. We were all in this together when we signed it. So that's one. And then two, think about it from like Boston College's perspective or Syracuse's perspective. Besides the fact that it's just giving away more money, it also doesn't guarantee that Clemson or Florida State is going to stay beyond 2036. So if I'm Boston College or I'm Syracuse or I'm whatever, I just say, sorry, we're riding this thing out as long as we can. Because even if we agree to give you more money, all you're going to do is take our money and then go to the SEC the second that you can get out of this deal. So I don't want to keep going on with this ACC thing, but it's going to be a fascinating story to watch unfold over these next couple months, couple years, because clearly these 7 schools are not happy, but I'm also not positive that there's a way out. And so if I had to guess, I think the ACC, I think it's going to be business as usual because I just don't see the scenario where they can get out.